All right. Well, Nadia, good to see you. Kelly, good to see you as well. And Ben and John, of course, always good to see you. Um,
Oh,
while,
I know it's wrong.
yeah, while we're thinking,
There we go.
if you
There he
wouldn't
is.
mind, oh, there we are, uh, putting in the chat at number 1 through 5, what is your biggest concern today? Target market, logo design, brand colors or palette, typography or fonts, and where or how to use my brand. Obviously, as usual, we have more material than we can cover in an hour. So, I want to spend the time when people are the most concerned or, have the biggest issues they have.
Okay.
Right. So, yeah, just add a 1 through 5 to the chat, and then John, you can tell me later what people decided. And also, if you have not already downloaded the workbook, you'll want to take notes using that. So that will be very helpful. And if this is your first workshop with us, Nadia, I think this is one of your first. We'd love to have you just jump in whenever you feel like it. It's great to, have a small group so that we can we can participate with each other, and this is why we do these live events, is so that we can get the interaction. So feel free to jump in whenever you like, and we'll take care of it. Okay, so here's a couple of polls that I've done on LinkedIn, which is, of course, the world's most scientific way of collecting data. But of course, because it only registers your own friends and family and everything else. But it does give you an idea, I think, of some of people's feelings about these things. So, one question that I asked, and this was actually a year ago, what level of branding is helpful for aviation sales? Is branding irrelevant? Is it all commodities? People choose whatever suits their needs and has the best circumstances for what they're doing. Do you need just a logo? Do you need a strong brand story and elements, or do you need a full brief with all of the details? And what's interesting is a lot of the folks that we talk to are very old school, are very traditional about brands, and aren't really believers in marketing. I like to use John as our target market, kind of I don't really care what brand it is as long as it does what I need it to do. And which is true until you say the words Harley Davidson to him, right? Am I right?
Well,
There are some brands that you do have an emotional connection with. And, you don't care whether it's the best motorcycle. You care that it's a Harley Davidson, right?
well, the problem. Well, that's not a problem. But the thing with Harley is, it started the country on the. You could argue Indian, but Harley Davidson started the country on motorcycles. They provided the military during the war effort with motorcycles,
Yeah.
and then when the war was over, you could get those motorcycles for $50 each. They were cheap.
Yeah. So
And
history
the
and
military
nostalgia.
they were just dumping them. And so everybody got one.
Right.
And, you know, I, when I was growing up around 12, 13 years old, I saw a motorcycle. I ended up being a motorcycle. I thought it was a bicycle somebody put a motor on.
Hmm.
And so I was trying to figure out what was going on so I could do the same thing because I didn't like pedaling.
Hmm.
Found out years later the darn thing was because there's one down in the Harley shop here in Salt Lake that looks exactly like it, and it's got HD on it. So I learned some stuff.
Right. But the stories in your head when you hear about a brand like Apple or Harley Davidson or Nike or anything else, are about nostalgia or action or something very emotional. So I do think that people are coming around to the fact that even aviation brands, people are not going to pick the parts or the software or the components or no matter how um, commoditized your product is, your brand can help a lot. So I wanted to share that. And then also this, we all know that it's important to establish a strong brand, but once your brand is established, how often should you revisit your branding? And out of 20 people, which is the world's most scientific survey we could come up with, 55% said every year. And, of course, everything is a vast simplification. I think some things should last forever. Your logo, some basic elements of your brand should last forever. But, there are some things that you can really improve on over time. And I think that's a wonderful thing if you can
So, what do you mean by revisit?
revisit. And I use that word intentionally because I wanted people to interpret that however they chose. I didn't mean revamp. I didn't mean start over your design process. I didn't mean any of those things. I meant um, reconsider. And so I think a lot of things about your brand can be updated. A lot of things can be changed without losing what we call brand equity. And we'll be talking about that today as well, what that is and how to
Well,
preserve it versus what to keep.
I had a very good reason for asking because when I went through business school, we talked about Coke and Pepsi
Hmm.
and just statistics that are very old now. But back then, Coke, out of every dollar they made in revenues, spent 7 cents, 70% on marketing their brand.
Hmm.
To me, that was just astronomical.
Right. And that is absolutely true, but they're a commodity product. So if your product costs, 7 cents to make, because it's sugar and water and carbon dioxide, you have to differentiate from everybody else who has a commodity product. So, that's one thing I think, a far extreme of that. Um, you may know I worked at Wells Fargo. They spent a lot of money on their brand stories, their brand elements. Every new person that worked at Wells Fargo spent a half a day in what they call brand camp. At least, if you were in marketing, you spent more time than that. But they had a 30-page brand brief. When do you use the logo? How do you use the logo? How much space should be around the logo? What are our colors? What are our fonts? Where can you get them? Under what circumstances do you use which of them? All of that, is in huge detail. And I think most aviation brands don't need to go to that extreme. But I think most of them could benefit from a lot more than what they're currently doing.
Exactly.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about your target audience, a colors checklist, a typography checklist, a logo checklist, things that you should or shouldn't do, or that your logo should or shouldn't be able to do for you, other brand opportunities, creating a brand brief or a brand board and why you would want one. And then talking about how effective is your brand? How do you measure your brand equity, right? The branding goal for today, or the goal for today, is to find a way to shorten your sales cycle using your brand. So if you look at your prospecting, approaching, holding pattern sales, referrals, and testimonials, where does the brand help the most and where does it help the least? And, what can you do to help your sales cycle with the brand? So this is what we suggest. If you're in your prospecting phase, if you're looking for new customers, while you're doing that, you want to do minimal branding. You want to focus on benefits, reasons that people should do business with you. They don't care who you are until they care what you can do for them. So, like your homepage on your website should be about your customers, not necessarily a flaming, spinning, fabulous logo, because people don't care about your company yet. Same thing when you make an initial approach, minimal branding. Once you get into the holding pattern and somebody has made an initial conversation with you, and maybe they're a potential investor or a potential buyer, so they know about you and they have had an initial conversation, then you can start adding more branding so that they remember and they start associating the repeated connection with you. And this is why, if Coke were brand new in the world, they would probably not be leading with their logo. But since they already have a million customers, well, billions of customers, they are using a lot of branding because all they need to do is sales. They don't need to do all the rest of the stuff, the prospecting, the approaching, the holding pattern, and all that stuff. And then the most branding is after you've made a sale. So we like to say, and I have the wrong mug today, we have an ABCI mug that all of our clients that have been with us for any length of time have this dark blue mug with our logo on it. And I hope to see that everywhere we go. I want all of our customers to have their office full of ABCI stuff. I want binders on the in their bookcases. I want books on their bookcases from us. I want us to be very, very visible, that they are an ABCI customer. And I want them to remember every time they turn around, oh, I should ask ABCI to do this for me. I should get this done by ABCI, and so on. So, that's where you have the most branding. A lot of people make the mistake of talking about themselves on the first date, right? The first date is not about you. It is about, what you have in common, what you share together, what you know about the other person or what you'd like to know about the other person. So you should spend a lot of time asking questions and a lot of time getting to know the other person. But then once you're married, then you have a wedding ring, right? And you have the other person's last name and you have all kinds of things. So, there's a lot of branding that goes on the further a relationship progresses. Same thing with any other type of marketing. You want to start with a really light hand and then add more as you go forward. All right. So talking about your target audience, since your first few steps of that sales process should be branded, but very lightly. It should be more about your customers than it is about you. And if you look at some of the more recent Nike ads and other things, they're talking about athletes, they're talking about women, they're talking about kids, they're talking about the Paralympians, they're talking about, specific customers that they have. They're not necessarily talking about their shoes and talking about how much more cushy heel foam there is in their shoes. You never see that in a Nike ad. What you do see is their customers and how they are getting out of bed, they're lacing on their sneakers, and they're hitting the road before the sun comes up. They're talking about their customers, their problems, their ambitions, their desires, their stories, and how their product is involved with that. So, they lead with the customer and then introduce the product. And this is not always easy to do, but as an example, ETT, they provide software to dispatchers, so they know about the life of a dispatcher. A lot of them have been dispatchers, so they know the problems they have, the headaches they have, the things that keep them up at night. All of that they know very, very well, and talk about how they're going to help make their lives easier. So, they lead with, we know about your problems, Mr. Dispatcher, or Mrs. Dispatcher. So let's talk about you and let's talk about how we can help you. And then you want to think about your brand as kind of a visual shorthand for the key promise that you make to those people. All right. So colors. If you walk through the NBAA convention, as we're going to have in Las Vegas this year, and this was more true 20 years ago than it is now. When John and I started in this business, our first NBAA, I was telling John, this is the biggest sea of navy blue I have ever seen in my whole entire life. Everybody's logo was navy blue and white. Everybody was wearing a navy blue suit with a white shirt. It was very, very uniform. And that's for good reason. If you go into color psychology or any of those kinds of things, there's a lot to be said for the color blue. It's of stability, it's safety, it's, in aviation, it's kind of symbolic of the sky. A lot of banks also and financial institutions also use the color blue because it's associated with those kinds of things. So there are very good reasons to use navy blue. But what I'm suggesting and what I always look at with clients the first time we look at their branding is there something on the other side of the color wheel that we could use as an accent color to differentiate? So maybe navy blue is your primary branding color. That's cool, but could we add an accent color of some kind that would make you stand out a little bit better. So as long as you go at least 1/3 away, count 3 squares away, right, from your navy blue, any of those would be great accent colors, right, for an aviation brand because you've got the contrast with the navy blue and you also differentiate. And, we also want to look at your competitors and say, what colors are their logos? Because we can do some really fun things with, mentioning your competitors without mentioning your competitors. Vision Aircraft Records and Blue Tail, as an example, Blue Tail is blue, Vision Aircraft Records is red. So, if we do a comparison sheet or something like that, we already have a shorthand. We don't have to say which is which. It becomes very obvious who we're talking about. So we really, really love having some kind of an accent color. We don't want to talk you out of your navy blue because you probably have a very good reason for that. If that's your brand color, you may want to stick with that. We're also seeing a lot more black and white in the last few years than we ever have before, and I think that's because contrast is an amazing thing. And we'll talk about some of the things that we can do, as we go forward. This is really true in the United States, which is where most of our experience is. Slightly less true in Europe, South America, Asia, Africa, and so on. But navy blue is super popular with all of the airlines, and they have the numbers, right, for the aviation industry. Once we get into business aviation, our numbers are smaller. So often we have to look at the most closely adjacent industry, which for us would be airlines, that has massive, massive amounts of data. So these guys have done a ton of research before they decided to design their brand. Business aviation companies, we have, 0.01% of the numbers that the airlines have as far as consumers and things like that. But so we like to take some of the data from that. And you'll notice that, the least used colors, brown, gray, white, we don't really recommend those. A black and white can be a really nice thing. We do a black and white version of our logo, and it's great to have that as well. If you're in Asia, of course, you're going to want to consider red. I think there's some cultural influences there that make red a much more um, associated with positivity and with good fortune and other things in some of the Asian cultures. So you also want to consider, where are your markets now and where do you want them to be in the future? So, incorporate some of those colors that these guys have spent a lot of time and energy doing as your primary color, and then pick an accent color, whether this information is helpful to you or not. This is mainly about your primary color. Anything surprising here?
Well, I'm not a color guy, so it's all surprising.
Right. My son's colorblind. My husband is not colorblind, but he's pretty close. I don't think he sees quite as many colors as I do. But a lot of people, you say teal and they go, what? Or chartreuse or, whatever and stuff like that. They have no idea what you're talking about. So, yeah, I do think primary colors are great. Blue is a fabulous choice, but you certainly don't want to have the same color as all of your competition. So if you're the last one to market, you're going to want to pick something different or, make sure that you stand out visually in some way. Okay, so there's a little bit in your notes about color psychology that we're not going to get into today, just in the interest of time. But the main thing is you want to choose a primary color that suits your brand and that suits your primary audience that they're going to feel really comfortable in and everything else. But you're also going to want to be able to differentiate, especially from your competitors. So, those are really important in your choice of a primary color and in your choice of a secondary color. And then the next thing you want to do is test your colors in different ways, try them out in different combinations, make sure you've got good visibility. There's some nice tools in Canva where you can see the legibility. If you type in one color on another color, it will tell you this is 30% legible or 100% legible or, whatever the situation is. So you want to make sure that they are high enough contrast from each other that you're not just using navy and midnight. That's your primary colors and your accent colors. You need to have a little bit more separation there. And usually, as I said, if you go 3 steps away on a color wheel, that's a good separation, usually enough contrast to be able to see the difference and to have a nice visual differentiation there. Is anybody on the call colorblind? Okay, good. Because we need to change the conversation a little bit if that's the case. And my biggest advice for that is to find a brand designer or somebody that can see color. So that's probably a good thing. Okay, test your colors and consider accessibility. Once again, that some of the accessible software that reads text on a screen needs a certain amount of contrast in order to read text. So even if it looks fine to you, you want to make sure that you tested it with the accessibility software as well. All right. So that's pretty much it with colors. The other thing is consistency. So, if I have colors on the screen and then I get something printed, um, Ben, as you know, we just had that banner printed for DBT. Um, Most printers are pretty good at using the Pantone system or some other color standardization system so that when a color shows up in one form, it's going to be very similar to the color in a different medium or a different format. We just ordered some things from Vistaprint on canvas and we're amazed at the difference between the colors of things that were on paper versus on canvas.
Oh, yeah.
So sometimes your medium is going to really screw things up. What we did at Wells Fargo is we had a press kit with little cards that were printed in our colors. And then if you were responsible for buying anything for the brand, you had to go to the printer, check it out with your press kit, hold your little card next to it, make sure the colors matched, and all of those things, and make sure that it was exactly the right shade, and make sure that it was precisely on, visually on, as well as chemically on the color that you're wanting, right? Okay. Typography. You can say a lot of things very, very differently just by changing your typography. I thought these illustrations were pretty good examples of, you can portray a lot of mood with typography. You know how they say that 90% or 80%, depending on who you talk to, of your communication is body language? You can think of typography as body language. How are you presenting yourself? How are you putting your words across? What inflection or tonality are you putting on your words? And that kind of started as a tradition when they would use different fonts for things. If you wanted to emphasize a certain word, you'd use bold, or if you wanted to emphasize action, you would use italics. We always use that for quotes. So we've all grown up using different typography, whether we knew it or not. But we want to lean into that with marketing and say, our fonts, our brand fonts are one thing, and then we also want to have an accent font that is different from our brand fonts, that we use for different reasons and different situations, and that we have some contrast between them. So, if you look at some of these things, coffee looks really jittery, enjoy life looks really casual and informal. You have the courage to begin again. This is super inspiring, partly because of the fonts, partly because of the art. All of that is part of what we do. There's a story that Steve Jobs never really found himself until he was actually in a calligraphy class in college, that he suddenly decided, you know what? The computer stinks. It does not express enough. It is not user friendly. It doesn't communicate well enough. And that is how he was inspired to build the Mac, because the PCs at the time, or the computers at the time, the luggables and the trash 80s and all of those kinds of things, were really terrible with typography. So, there are people who feel very, very strongly about typography. A lot of people feel it's an afterthought, but it certainly isn't. And the tone of voice matters, right? When you say something. So, John and I can be having the same conversation. He can say the same sentence to me, and sometimes it really, really hacks me off, and other times it's totally fine. And it's all about the tone of voice. And typography is exactly that, the tone of voice. I'll always find you versus I'll always find you. That's creepy versus romantic, right? There's a lot of meaning in a font. So we want to be very careful with our thoughts with that. You may already know there are basically two classifications of fonts. There's serif fonts that have graphical tops and bottoms. There are intentional misspellings in this because, if you are reading this, you probably won't notice unless I tell you that there are misspellings in the first paragraph. Your eye will pick them or, will read the first paragraph much, much easier than the second paragraph because you are grabbed by the misspellings. You're watching every single letter because every letter is separate in a sans serif font. Every letter is kind of, what is the word? Flowing together with serif font. So your eye kind of glides past things and you get the sense for what is written, not necessarily the precision of each letter.
That's fine unless you're an editor like I am.
In which case you probably grabbed it in both cases.
That's right.
Okay. Which did you see first, the serif or the sans serif misspelling?
I mean, but actually in sans serif it jumps out at you, and the other one you have to do a double take to see if it's
Actually misspelled, right? I used to have this whole paragraph, only the first and last letter were correct. Everything else was all jumbled. And, with the serif fonts, people would read it and just, continue on without noticing that there was anything wrong with it. But now we just, use the one word to illustrate the point. But it is a big difference, between serif and sans serif fonts. So what we usually recommend is serif fonts for long paragraphs. That kind of helps people read faster and retain better the general sense of what you're writing. But if you are if you're writing online or if you are writing very little, bullet points or other things, then a sans serif font is the better choice because people focus on every single letter and every single word, as opposed to just getting the whole flow of the paragraph. Make sense?
Yep.
All right. You guys are super agreeable today. That's a beautiful thing. Okay.
It makes it go faster when they are.
Yeah, that's true. We'll have more time for questions at the end, which is it's totally fine. But do feel free to jump in anytime, especially if you disagree with me. That just makes things much more interesting. So that's always fun. Okay, so your typography checklist is very similar to your color checklist. What do you understand about your brand and what you're trying to communicate? What do you understand about your audience and what makes them resonate with the message that you're trying to get across? You want to consider readability, for maybe have a different font for your headlines versus your paragraphs. Choose a primary font. Choose some complementary fonts that are different. One thing we don't want to do is kind of have the ransom note effect. This happened when we were doing websites, I think, very early in the days of the wild west of the World Wide Web. And people figured out that they could use any font they wanted. And so they did. And that kind of went crazy for a while. And every website kind of looked like a ransom note for a little while in that time period. But I think things have gotten much cleaner. One thing we like to do is use either Apple fonts or Google fonts because they are so ubiquitous that they're available anywhere and they're available in browsers. So if people look at your website in Safari as an example, then the Apple fonts are faster to load. They're just easier from a technical perspective. It saves you a lot of hassle if you play into those big, I know it's what they want us to do, right? But, those big technology companies, there are advantages with playing their game, and using those particular fonts and things that they have developed and that they are working hard to distribute. And, all of those big technology companies want to be the master of fonts. So Microsoft, Google, Apple, etc. They're all competing for that honor, and they want you to use their fonts, and they will reward you with either a little extra speed or a little extra convenience or a little extra something when you use the fonts that the big companies have developed as well. If you choose an artisan font, at Wells Fargo, we actually commissioned, or they had commissioned, a font, a couple of fonts that were trademarked so that no one else could use them. And that was partly because they were doing, legal documents and other things in those fonts. And if nobody else could use those fonts, it made, what do you call those, plagiarism or fraudulent documents harder to detect. But most of us don't have that issue, so we want to be as ubiquitous as we can. We also want to consider licensing and cost. So, if you do have a licensed font and it's not licensed to your social media, it's not licensed to your other uh, places that you use it, then you end up using it, or you end up paying more for it. If you want to import it into Canva, if you want to import it into your website, if you want to do this or that or the other thing with it, you can pay a lot of money per year for a custom font. So that's a thing that a lot of people may or may not be aware of. And then you also want to consider accessibility. Can JAWS read it? JAWS is the reader for the visually impaired. There are others on the market, but that's, I think, was the ubiquitous one at some point. And there are people who are visually impaired that use these technologies and depend on these technologies. And, if your fonts are unreadable by those technologies, then you're cutting out some of your market, as well as just being obnoxious to people who can't see very well. One other thing that we didn't put on here is, how does it look when you go bigger or smaller? So you want to consider, some fonts look fantastic at 12 points, but if you make them bigger, they look stupid, or vice versa. If you start at 112 points, it looks great, and then you make it smaller and it doesn't. So,
So are fonts vector graphics, or can they be?
Are what?
Fonts vector graphics so they can expand?
It depends on the software that you're using. So you can make vector graphics out of them. And if you use a font that is like Amsterdam 4 is like one of my favorite fonts because it's so cool and it's so fancy. And it's great for headlines. But if you export it into something else, then it will bitmap. So it's one of those things that's great in its native habitat, but you want to make sure you've got the fonts loaded. Otherwise, you get really horrible results, and you never want to take a chance on that. So whenever we use Amsterdam 4, we almost always make a graphic out of it and export it or print it or do something like that. I would never use it native on a website because, it's an example of one of those beautiful fonts that we wouldn't want to use for that reason. Make sense?
Okay.
All right. Good question. Okay, aviation industry logos. What do you notice about these that is similar among all of them?
Well, I'm not graphically oriented, so size?
No,
Um,
you can make them any size you wanted. This could cover a wall, or it could cover a postcard, or cover a business card.
that's a good question because I don't know.
What do they all include?
Like an image.
Like, yeah, an image or like there's some kind of movement in all of them, like the swoo or I don't know, is what I see. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's actually one of the things that is absolutely correct. What else? There's one other thing that I'm hoping somebody gets that's not me.
But the graphic, is that what you meant?
Every one of these has a wing
Uh,
or an airfoil, or a component of a wing or an airfoil.
Now I see it. I'm looking at it on my phone, so now I'm trying to enlarge it, and I think that's part of what I saw is movement.
Yeah,
Yeah, but absolutely, yeah, I see that.
yeah, and the movement is absolutely true. That's part of the reason that that people use that, because every one of these people is in the transportation industry in some way, or, in the movement industry in some way. But also every single one of these folks has something to do with aircraft. And so, probably this one is a propeller, but still that's just a collection of airfoils if you, so that's a little bit of a stretch.
What about the lower left?
Lower left.
The other side.
Okay. In-Flight USA is the one exception, but they do have the italics and kind of the upward movement. So, that's up and to the right is kind of the direction that all of these are going, with very rare exceptions. Direct tailwinds is upward and to the left. That's partly just because of the way their letters line up. But if there is movement, it's either upward or upward and to the right. With a couple of exceptions, every one of these has an airfoil of some kind, and every one of these has some kind of movement that is
interesting.
But they're very different logos, for very different companies. And there's a lot that you can do with a logo, but those are two elements that we look for when we're creating a logo for somebody. Is we want to make sure there's movement, and make sure that there is a symbol of some kind about aviation that makes it absolutely clear that that's the business that we're in. And we've got software companies, insurance companies, magazines, component makers, propeller fixers, there's all kinds of people in here, but they're all part of the aviation industry. So if you're going to be in the club, you have to wear the uniform, right? And, that's kind of a way of looking at it. And you can be really creative with how you wear the uniform. If you've ever been to a Catholic high school, you know that people get really, really wild with the variations that they can possibly do with the uniform. But everybody wears the uniform.
Interesting.
Right. So the other thing about each of these is that they follow, a certain set of criteria. Simplicity is one. We want to make sure that something is able to be used in different formats. And I'm going to tell you about some of the mistakes we made with our logo in just a minute. But is it original? Is it not going to be mistaken for somebody else's? Is it relevant to our industry? By using those airfoils, those symbols of aviation, those movement symbols, and elements and things like that. Is it scalable? Can it go big and small and still be recognizable and make sense? Color scheme, does it depend on a particular color scheme, or could the color scheme be simplified if you have to do an ice sculpture? Is kind of one of my tests of a logo. Is, would this look good as an ice sculpture? Would it be recognizable if you made an ice sculpture out of this logo? Because that removes a lot of the color and a lot of the detail. Is it still recognizable? Typography is another one. Is it using those elements of typography that we talked about? Is it memorable? Is it versatile? Is it timeless? And does it have the potential for an emotional connection? And I think that's part of the reason that we all have a wing or something on there. And we are all copying Nike in our industry. That's all the upward to the right, the airfoil, all of that stuff. We're not actually copying Nike, but that's one way of looking at it. So mistakes that we made with our logo is that we are using a gradient. You'll notice it goes from white to black in this line. That is a problem that we run into every time we wanted to get mugs engraved or have, leather embossed or an ice sculpture or, like this metal, powder cut metal thing that we have on our wall. Gradients are a huge problem for us and for anybody using a logo. Very thin lines are also a problem if we ever want to go very small. So, this can't be reduced as small as we would like. If we need what we call an icon, we use just this little airplane. So we use one component of the logo. That's one way to solve that problem. But if we had designed this logo properly, or if we were to design this logo starting from scratch today, we would not make those three mistakes. Since we've invested so much in our brand equity, we're going to keep it. But that's one of the decisions that we make when we do a brand consultation with someone is, Do you have brand equity in your logo that we need to keep? How much at liberty are we to make changes if we decide we want to for any of these reasons?
We can usually
Mhm.
make this work. The problem is sometimes it's prohibitively expensive.
Right?
And the other time is like in that wall behind her, that would have been prohibitively expensive, but we could have done it.
We could have, but it wouldn't look as good, if we painted the white on, the powder coated black, it just wouldn't work because it ends up being too small on the screen sometimes. So, we lose a lot in that sense. So we made a variation of our logo that's all black. That's how we solved that problem. But, there's always a way to solve a problem. It's just a question of if you design it correctly first, then you don't have problems you need to solve or design problems you need to solve in the long run.
Yep.
Okay. Fantastic. So this is fun with logos. The question is, can you or should you alter your logo? Or is it like the United States flag, which you shouldn't alter in any way? There are rules about that. Of course, people are doing it left and right and center all the time nowadays without thinking about it. They're making the different symbols that have the U.S. flag and so forth. But as far as branding goes, there is nothing wrong with having a little fun with your logo. Avion Trace does this every holiday. They make a different, I think this is Christmas. This is the 4th of July. This is St. Patrick's Day. Their logo on their website or on their advertising or on their posts is different every holiday. And that's just one of the things that they do that's kind of fun with their brand. Google, you'll notice, does this a lot. Every time there's a holiday or whatever, they'll do a variation or, have a contest for kids to draw their logo or, do other things to make that happen. Couple of things that are caveats with that is you want to do that after you have the brand equity to be able to get away with it so that people still recognize your brand because you're eliminating one of the factors that makes it recognizable. So Avion Trace has a very select group of customers, people who are familiar with them. Sherry Chappett is the Sherlock Holmes of aircraft records. If you are missing or if you can't find an aircraft record, she's the lady you call. The airlines that have a plane that's grounded because they are missing a piece of paper or whatever, she will chase it down and find it, or do what is necessary to get the responsible parties to recreate it or whatever. So it's a very select group of people that know Avion Trace know it very well. So they're totally fine with her changing her logo whenever she wants to. They know her very well, and she's not trying to expand beyond that certain small group of people who are her prospective customers. The people that manage aircraft records for airlines. There's maybe 100 people in the world that she needs as customers, and they all know her very well. Google has the opposite scenario. Everybody knows who Google is. So, they can play fast and loose with their logo and everybody will still recognize it because of where it is and because of the fact that everybody has seen it. So this is something we can do after you've built up some brand equity. And it's kind of fun to use your brand to express something in particular and make that work. Okay. Other brand images, things like, and I made this presentation a long time ago, and I have not found a better example than Jet Value's Jeremy. And he passed away about a year and a half ago. And I need to find another example because this makes me sad when I do it. But he was a really good friend of ours and a very great client. But his face was incredibly recognizable. His face was his brand. He would get on an airplane and go speak in Belarus about aircraft valuations. He would teach classes everywhere and so on. And so every advertisement that we did for him had his face on it, either his actual face or a caricature of him, because his face was so recognizable and it was very much associated with his brand. Other things, if we want to use our logo on a dark background, one of the ways that we've solved that problem is we've made this. This is my favorite airplane. This is a Mustang, and we've created some designs that we use in our marketing that look great on a dark background and that have our logo on them. So that's one way to resolve that issue and still have a little bit of fun with our brand. So you can create other images besides your logo that are official images, right? But are not necessarily your logo. So, it could be a bullet that you use on your website that's unique. It could be a graphical representation of something. It could be a photograph of your mascot, your hanger dog or whatever, that might end up being part of your brand equity or part of your brand assets. So, there's a lot of visual assets that you could include with your brand brief or your brand identity that are not necessarily your logo. So other brand opportunities, uniforms. Every time I do a webinar, I'm wearing a black or navy blue blazer with this little pin on it. That's my uniform. I wear this when I'm working. I know it looks good on the white background. If I have captions marching across my belly, I know they're going to be high contrast because I'm wearing something dark. So there are reasons that I've chosen this as kind of my my go-to uniform, and it's become part of our brand. If I showed up in a t-shirt, it would not be a branded opportunity for us. And I would never do that in a sales call or anything like that. Stationery, die cuts, other things, those are kind of fun. Amenity kits, if you're with a charter organization, or anything else. There's lots and lots of ways to use your brand. People do vehicle reps, they do graphics in their parking lots. There's all kinds of things that you can do. You just want to think out of the box. What do your customers interact with, and how do they see you? Do they see you on Zoom? In that case, you'll probably want a fabulous background like Ben's. That's part of his brand, and that has become a good way to communicate, since that's a really big part probably of your business. So yeah, and there are many, many different ways your customers interact with you, and you just want to make sure that every single interaction is branded, or that you're exploiting every opportunity to use that brand, especially in those later phases of the sales cycle. So when somebody is your customer, you want to make sure that they've got a lot of your stuff in their office, with your brand on it. Okay. I'm kind of spending about an equal time on everything because I never did hear what everybody's priorities were. So we'll keep going. So brand brief or a brand board. These are templates. There are some templates in Canva for this that are pretty good. We use Canva with all of our clients, and we create a brand kit for them so that when we do materials for them, we're using the same colors, the same fonts, everything else. And then this also creates some documents, or you can create some documents that you can print out and hand to a vendor. So if you were working with somebody who's working on a vehicle for you, or a trade show, or anything else, you can hand them your brand kit and say, this is what we want our brand to look like. This is what our logo looks like. These are a submark of our logo, which is a different variation that you can use smaller. These are the color palette numbers, the hex values. These are our fonts. This is maybe a little bit about your brand. You could actually use that for some of these things. And then some examples of photographs that you want to use. Everybody has a style of photography that they prefer. Some people like the filters, like Logue Aviation has their vintage 1940s golden age of aviation style of photography that they like to use in their brand. You probably have a different opinion or a different style for your photography, so you can put some examples in there. All right. How do you measure your brand equity? So this is a report from SEMrush, from the software that we use. You get a report every month from us that has a branded traffic trend and a branded versus non-branded situation. you can see, how many people are looking for your website by using branded keywords like ABCI or Aviation Business Consultants. Those are both branded keywords for us. If they're looking for that, then we know that they knew about us before they started looking. If they're looking for aviation marketing, then they're looking for our product that would be considered non-branded. And, to start with, most companies in the beginning, if prospecting is your primary motivator right now or your primary objective right now, then you're going to want a really high percentage of non-branded traffic. So 90% or more of people who are looking for avionics or aircraft maintenance or aviation software or, whatever it is, you're going to want to look for a much higher representation for the non-branded. And then once you've been in business for a while and you're getting a lot of repeat business, then that should move closer to a 50-50 or even higher on the branded side. So this is just basically how many people are looking for you specifically versus how many people are looking for the product or service that you offer. And that's kind of a nice way of looking at it. You can also measure your brand equity, with consumer surveys, or, some people will do a survey during NBAA or whatever. Have you heard of our brand? Or via social media, you can do a brand equity survey with that as well. Have you heard of DBT Aero? Have you heard of Islander Aviation? Have you heard of my company? And if that number is not to your liking, then we can adjust your branding appropriately. All right. So, we've talked about the different sections of your marketing cycle and, where you want the heaviest versus the lightest approach of branding. So, if you're in prospecting, you're going to want like 90 to 10. If you are getting most of your business by referrals and testimonials and that's intentional, then you're going to want a 90-10 that way. Everything in the middle, you're going to want somewhere on that gradient. So that's pretty much all I had. Of course, we do have other workshops that are available on demand, and we will just kind of open it for questions. If anybody has anything that they'd like to talk about or any examples from the studio audience would like to.
No, that was well done. Very interesting.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Did you learn anything new?
Well, it reminded me of a lot of, I used to run a brand business, but it reminded me of a lot of.
We could do this workshop yourself.
Not the same. We had guys designing logos or people designing logos, but it was a good reminder. And there were some parts of it, the checklists.
Mm-hmm.
We had, back then it was pretty different. But one of the challenges was displaying, everything we did was online.
Yeah.
So we worked for Coke. I did projects for Coca-Cola.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
So, yeah, they're shockingly particular about their brand.
Mm-hmm. As is Wells Fargo.
One of the interesting things is they do have a B2B sales group.
Mm.
And when you said, everybody knows them, that it's not really so what the B2B guys would do is they would go through cities and towns, stand on a corner, and if they couldn't see a Coke logo, they would go find a way to get one. So they would go into all the little bodegas and shops to try and get a Coke logo to be visible from every single corner in Sydney.
Wow.
That was the job. You should see a Coke logo from anywhere you happen to stop in any given city.
And so co-branded things with cafes and restaurants.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's great.
Well, they provide the fridges. Most of any Coke fridge you see in a bodega or a shop is actually given to that shop by Coke.
Yeah.
So they do.
Go ahead.
No, so it was good. My comment in the chat was, we're trying to, work with the investment community. And I spent time this morning with somebody who's special, has done $1 billion worth of raising.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was, talking about connecting with all these investors. And one of the challenges, it was kind of a perfect connection, because now I'm thinking, okay, one of the reasons I signed up, how do we use the brand to connect to investors? which is a very different audience.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I, went through all this, wholly focused on everything you're saying. Okay, not a sales pipeline, but an investor pipeline. How do I get that to work? So it was really quite good to shake my mindset, brains,
Excellent. Yeah, no, and the interesting thing is we do the same thing with internal marketing, with investor marketing, with getting your kids to eat their vegetables. Every problem to me is a marketing problem. You have to convince people that this is what they want to do, and give them all of the good reasons that they should be doing that. And it always starts with them. So, same principle applied. And
I will tell you,
yeah.
One of the clients, Oreo, had a great ad running, which I just loved. And we did work with Campbell Soups and we did a few others. But anyway, they did an Oreo cookie on the side of a mall elevator. And, the kind that are glass in the atriums.
Yeah.
So they had an Oreo cookie on the side of the elevator and a glass of milk on the panel at the bottom. So every time the elevator went down, the cookie went into the milk. There were no words except the cookie with the Oreo. The way it was brilliant.
It was.
Yeah.
I'd like to see that myself.
Right.
I got a video. I can send it to you. It's a terrible video. I mean, I shot it, but
great. I would love to include it on the replay for this, so that people who are watching the replay can see that video. There's great examples.
As a
it was
side
very
note,
clever.
As a side note to the Coke discussion, when I went through business school, our prof, and I must have been marketing, but anyway, he said there's no difference between Coke and Pepsi. It's just soda, right? He did a random Coke test, and I think he had like 7 different kinds of soda. There was, I don't remember the names now, Royal Crown, all kinds of stuff. 77% of the people picked Coke.
Wow.
He didn't believe it. So the next day, or the next time we met, he ran it again. It was 76.
Wow. So he can't taste the difference. There's a lot of people that can't smell it.
Yeah, they must not be able to taste the difference, but the people in our class did.
Right.
Coke was always furious about the taste test because the way Pepsi is designed, it has a much better appeal to the palate when you first sip it. Coke has a better, because its caramel levels are different. You get a much more lasting enjoyment out of a Coke. So Coke was frustrated because they would lose taste tests. But if you buy a Coke, you enjoy it more. It's like, a fine wine problem.
Right. Yeah. If you do the taste test immediately after they take the first sip versus 10 minutes later.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair.
Yeah, wow. It's very interesting.
Well, I learned a lot.
There you go.
Anybody else want to share anything that they learned? Or I know we're running over time, so we'll stop it there. But I just wanted to open the floor if anybody else wanted to share anything that they learned for the first time or revelation.
I found it all fascinating. I love the color information and the font and logos. I mean, it was all very, very interesting. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. And I know we are probably going to be working on a brand sometime soon for you. So hopefully it was timely as well.
Yes. Thank you.
Good to hear you, Carrie. Thank you for joining us.